You know, after 40 years sitting on this bench, I thought I'd seen every kind of person walk through my courtroom doors. And before we go any further, if you're enjoying these stories about real justice and respect for the law, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people learn that nobody is above the law. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. I've seen doctors, lawyers, politicians, business owners, people from every walk of life. I've seen decorated police officers and beloved teachers. But that Thursday morning in March, something walked into my courtroom that shook me to my core. Not because I was afraid, no, because I was disappointed in a way I hadn't felt in years. I got to court early that morning like I always do. It was 8:15 a.m., and Christina, my court clerk, had already made me a cup of strong Italian coffee. She's been with me for almost 20 years now, and she knows exactly how I like it. Black, strong, no sugar. The kind of coffee my father used to drink after working all day at the construction site and all night doing security work. I was reviewing my docket for the day when Christina leaned over and whispered, "Judge, this morning's going to be interesting." She pointed to a name on the list, Captain Marcus Brennan. The charges: driving under the influence, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Now, DUI cases are serious, but they're not unusual in my courtroom. What made this different was the note attached to the file from the arresting officer. It read, "Judge Caprio, you need to see this one for yourself. Captain refused breathalyzer, claimed military status exempted him from local law enforcement, became verbally aggressive when placed under arrest, multiple witnesses." I looked at the rest of the file. Captain Marcus Brennan, age 42, 20 years in the United States Army, served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. On paper, this man was a genuine American hero. But there's something my father taught me when I was growing up in Providence's Italian neighborhood. He'd say, "Frank, medals and titles, they don't make a man. How you treat people when nobody's watching, that's what makes a man." My father, Giuseppe Caprio, came to this country with nothing, no education, no money, barely spoke English. But he had something more valuable than any medal. He had character. He worked 3 jobs to support our family. Construction during the day, loading docks at night, weekend shifts as a security guard. And you know what? I never once heard him brag about how hard he worked. He never demanded special treatment. He never thought the rules didn't apply to him. He just showed up, did his job, treated everyone with respect, and went home to his family. That's the kind of man my father was. And that's why, when I saw this file about a decorated military officer who thought his medals meant he didn't have to follow the same laws as everyone else, it made my blood boil. Christina noticed my expression. "Judge, you okay?" "I'm fine, Christina. Just thinking about how service to your country should make you humble, not arrogant." I took another sip of my coffee and looked at the courtroom filling up with people. There were more observers than usual. Word must have gotten out about this case. And then I saw him walk in. Captain Marcus Brennan. Even from across the courtroom, I could see he was still wearing his dress uniform. Full medals on display. Chest puffed out like he was on parade, walking with that swagger that said he thought he was better than everyone else in the room. It was going to be one of those days. I could feel it. Before Captain Brennan's case came up, I had another veteran on my docket, Private First Class Daniel Rivera. Young man, maybe 25 years old. He was cited for having an expired vehicle registration. His tags were 2 months out of date. "Private Rivera," I said as he approached the bench. He walked up slowly, using a cane to support himself. I noticed the prosthetic leg immediately. You could see the metal and plastic below his pant leg. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, standing as straight as he could despite the obvious pain it caused him. "Son, you don't need to stand at attention in my courtroom. Please have a seat if it's more comfortable." "With respect, Your Honor, I prefer to stand." I looked at his file. Served in Afghanistan, lost his leg to an IED, medically discharged 8 months ago. Now working part-time at a grocery store while going to community college on the GI Bill. The registration violation happened because he'd been in and out of the VA hospital with infections related to his prosthetic. "Private Rivera, I see here you've been dealing with some medical issues related to your service injury." Yes, sir, but that's not an excuse, Your Honor. I should have taken care of the registration. I take full responsibility for my mistake. Now that's what you call a man. That's what you call honor. Not the medals on your chest, not the rank you achieved. It's standing there, taking responsibility for your actions. No excuses, no complaints. Private Rivera, I'm dismissing this citation. You've served your country with honor, and you're clearly working hard to rebuild your life. Get that registration fixed when you can, and thank you for your service. The relief on his face was immediate. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. I'll get it done this week. As Private Rivera turned to leave, I heard it, a scoff, a mocking laugh from the back of the courtroom. I looked up and saw Captain Brennan sitting there, shaking his head, wearing this smirk that said he found the whole thing amusing. Private Rivera heard it too. I saw his shoulders tense. He glanced back at Captain Brennan, and I saw something in his eyes, not anger, shame. This young man who'd sacrificed his leg for his country felt ashamed because a superior officer was mocking him in public. That's when I knew. Captain Brennan wasn't just arrogant. He was the kind of person who used his rank to make others feel small, the kind who thought his achievements gave him the right to look down on people. Next case, I called out, even though I already knew what was coming. Captain Marcus Brennan, driving under the influence, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. And here he came, striding down the center aisle like he was walking onto a parade ground, every medal catching the light, every step deliberate, designed to impress. When he reached the bench, he didn't stop at the proper distance. He walked right up close, invading the space, establishing dominance. I could smell the alcohol on him from 5 feet away. At 9:30 in the morning, this man still reeked of booze. Captain Brennan, I began. That's right, Judge, he interrupted me, tapping his chest where his medals were displayed. Captain Marcus Brennan, 20 years of service, 3 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart. I've bled for this country. I've seen things you couldn't imagine. I've earned every one of these medals. I looked around my courtroom. Private Rivera was still there, standing by the door. Mrs. Patterson, my regular observer, looked concerned. The arresting officer, Sergeant Mike Thompson, was sitting in the front row with his arms crossed, watching carefully. And I thought about my father again, about how real honor doesn't need to announce itself, about how genuine service doesn't demand recognition. This was going to be interesting. Captain Brennan, I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, you're here because you were arrested 3 nights ago for driving under the influence. According to the police report, you were driving erratically on Route 95, crossed the center line multiple times, and when you were pulled over, you refused to submit to a breathalyzer test. Is that correct? He waved his hand dismissively. Judge, with all due respect, that officer had no right to pull me over. I was driving fine. I've operated vehicles in combat zones under fire. You think I can't handle driving on a highway after a few drinks? A few drinks. He said it like it was nothing, like the law against drunk driving was just a suggestion for regular people, but not for war heroes like him. Captain, the law in this state is very clear. If you're operating a vehicle and an officer has probable cause to believe you're impaired, you're required to submit to a breathalyzer test. You refused. That refusal carries automatic penalties. He laughed. Actually laughed. Automatic penalties? Judge, do you know who I am? I've served this country for 20 years. I've fought in 5 different combat zones. I've saved lives. I've led men into battle. I think I've earned the right to be treated with a little more respect than some common drunk driver. There it was, the entitlement, the belief that his service gave him special privileges, that the rules that applied to everyone else didn't apply to him. Captain Brennan, your service to this country is noted and appreciated, but that service doesn't exempt you from following the law. In fact, I would argue that someone with your training and discipline should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. His face started to turn red. Higher standard? You want to talk about standards, Judge? I've met standards you can't even comprehend. Physical standards, mental standards, combat readiness standards. I've passed tests that would break most men. And you're sitting there telling me I can't have a few drinks and drive home. He was getting louder now. The courtroom was completely silent except for his voice. People were starting to look uncomfortable. Captain, please lower your voice. This is a courtroom, not a battlefield. Now, according to the arresting officer's report, when you were asked to step out of the vehicle, you became verbally aggressive and refused to comply. Is that accurate? He turned and pointed at Sergeant Thompson in the front row. That kid? That rookie cop who probably spent his whole career giving out parking tickets? He's going to tell me what to do? I've commanded hundreds of soldiers. I've made life and death decisions. And this small-town cop thinks he can order me around. Sergeant Thompson kept his face neutral, but I could see his jaw tighten. He was a professional, but he was also human. Being insulted in open court had to sting. Captain Brennan, you need to understand something. In this courtroom, rank doesn't matter. Medals don't matter. What matters is whether you broke the law, and according to all the evidence, you did. You drove drunk, you refused to cooperate with law enforcement, and you showed complete disregard for public safety. He stepped even closer to my bench. You know what your problem is, Judge. You don't understand sacrifice. You sit in this comfortable courtroom with your comfortable life, and you judge people who've actually done something important. You've never had to make the decisions I've made. You've never had to watch good men die because of orders from politicians who don't know what war really means. Now he was turning this into something personal, making it about me instead of about his actions. Classic deflection from someone who knows they're wrong but refuses to admit it. Captain, you're right. I've never served in combat, but my father fought in World War II. He came home with shrapnel in his leg that bothered him until the day he died. And you know what he never did? He never used his service as an excuse to break the law. He never demanded special treatment. He never thought his sacrifice meant the rules didn't apply to him. Captain Brennan's face was bright red now. Don't you dare compare your father to me. Don't you dare. I've been in firefights your father couldn't imagine. Modern warfare, insurgencies, counterterrorism. I've earned these medals. He was practically shouting now, jabbing his finger toward his chest, toward all those medals he was so proud of. I'm a war hero. I've saved lives. I've bled for this country. And you're going to treat me like some common criminal? You're going to let that punk cop humiliate me? I'm untouchable. You can't touch me. And there it was. The truth that had been bubbling under the surface the whole time. He genuinely believed he was untouchable, that his medals were a shield against consequences, that his service gave him immunity from the law. I looked at Private Rivera, still standing by the door, this young man who'd actually sacrificed something real, his leg, his future, his health, and he'd done it without demanding special treatment. And here was Captain Brennan, using his service like a weapon, like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I stood up from my bench. I rarely do this, but when I do, people know I'm serious. Captain Brennan, you stand there and talk about earning those medals, but let me tell you something about honor. Real honor doesn't need to shout about itself. Real honor doesn't demand special treatment. Real honor means accepting responsibility for your actions, no matter who you are or what you've done. You come into my courtroom drunk at 9:30 in the morning. You insult law enforcement officers. You mock a disabled veteran. You demand to be treated differently because of your medals. Well, let me tell you something. Those medals represent values, honor, duty, respect, selfless service, and you're not living up to a single one of them. His lawyer finally stepped forward. Your Honor, my client is under a lot of stress. Perhaps we could take a brief recess. But Captain Brennan pushed his lawyer aside. Stress? You want to talk about stress? I've been under stress you couldn't handle. I've been responsible for hundreds of lives. I've made decisions that kept this country safe. And you, he pointed directly at me now, his voice rising to a shout. You're a nobody, a small-time municipal judge in a nothing town. I've met with generals. I've briefed congressmen. I've been decorated by the Secretary of Defense. What have you done? What gives you the right to judge me? The courtroom was in shock. Mrs. Patterson had her hand over her mouth. The law students were frozen in their seats. Even his own lawyer looked horrified. And that's when I saw it in the back of the courtroom. Two men in army dress uniforms standing up. One of them was a full colonel. The other was a military police officer. Captain Brennan had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Captain Brennan, I said, my voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife, you are hereby found in contempt of this court. Additionally, based on your behavior here today and the evidence of your arrest, I am finding you guilty of driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Bailiff, take him into custody. But before my bailiff could move, the colonel was already walking down the center aisle. Captain Brennan, the colonel's voice rang out with authority. I am Colonel James Mitchell from Fort Devens. I've been authorized by the Judge Advocate General's office to inform you that your conduct, both during your arrest and here in this courtroom today, is being referred for court-martial proceedings. The color drained from Captain Brennan's face. All that arrogance, all that swagger, all that self-righteous anger, it evaporated in an instant. What? No. Colonel, I can explain. You've already explained quite enough, Captain, Colonel Mitchell said coldly. Your behavior has brought dishonor to your uniform and to every soldier who's ever served. Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative suspension pending the court-martial. Remove your medals. Colonel, please, I've served 20 years. Remove your medals. Colonel Mitchell's voice was ice cold. Captain Brennan's hands were shaking as he reached up to his chest. One by one he unpinned his medals, the bronze stars he'd bragged about, the Purple Heart he'd used as a shield, the Army Commendation medals he'd waved around like a permission slip to break the law. Each medal clinked as he placed them in the colonel's outstretched hand, and with each one I watched him shrink. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. He wasn't Captain Brennan, war hero anymore. He was just Marcus Brennan, a man who'd thrown away 20 years of service because he thought he was above the law. Additionally, I added, I'm sentencing you to the maximum fine of $2,500, suspension of your driver's license for 1 year, and 200 hours of community service. You'll be serving that community service at the VA hospital, helping veterans who actually understand what honor and humility mean. The military police officer stepped forward with handcuffs. Captain Brennan looked around the courtroom desperately, searching for sympathy, for someone to defend him, but there was nothing, just disappointed faces and shaking heads. As they led him out of my courtroom, no longer in handcuffs but in the custody of military police, he turned back one last time. Judge, I'm sorry. I didn't mean those things I said. Captain Brennan, I replied, you meant every word. That's the problem. You genuinely believed you were untouchable. You thought your service gave you permission to endanger innocent people by driving drunk. You thought your medals meant you could disrespect the law and the people who enforce it. Well, you just learned a very expensive lesson about humility. And with that, they led him away. The man who walked in like he owned the world was leaving in disgrace, stripped of his medals, facing a court-martial, and finally, understanding that nobody is above the law. After they took Captain Brennan away, I called a 10-minute recess. I needed to collect my thoughts. The courtroom slowly emptied, but a few people stayed behind. Private Rivera approached the bench, still using his cane for support. Your Honor, he said quietly, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank me for what, son? For showing me that the uniform still means something, that the values we're supposed to uphold actually matter. His voice cracked slightly. When I came back from Afghanistan, when I lost my leg, I started wondering if my service meant anything. Then I see guys like Captain Brennan using their service as an excuse to act like jerks, and it makes me question everything. Private Rivera, your service means everything, not because of what you lost, but because of how you carry yourself. You came into my courtroom today, took responsibility for a minor mistake, and showed more honor in 5 minutes than Captain Brennan showed in his whole career. That's what real service looks like. He nodded, his eyes wet. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Colonel Mitchell approached next. Judge Caprio, I want to apologize on behalf of the United States Army. Captain Brennan's behavior was inexcusable. He's disgraced the uniform and everyone who wears it. Colonel, you don't need to apologize. Every organization has people who forget why they serve. What matters is how you respond when they reveal themselves. Still, Judge, I want you to know we take this very seriously. The court-martial will be thorough. Men like Brennan, they tarnish what so many have built through genuine sacrifice. 3 days later, I received a letter from Sergeant Thompson, the arresting officer that Captain Brennan had insulted so viciously. Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted to thank you for standing up for law enforcement in your courtroom. When Captain Brennan called me a small-town cop, it hurt. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've never pulled rank on anyone, never demanded special treatment. I just try to keep people safe. Seeing you hold him accountable, seeing you defend the integrity of the law, it reminded me why I became a cop in the first place. Thank you, sir." That letter sits in my office to this day. A week later, I got a call from the director of the VA hospital, where Captain Brennan was doing his community service. The director, a Vietnam veteran himself, wanted to give me an update. "Judge, I thought you'd want to know. Brennan started his community service yesterday. Put him in the prosthetics unit, helping guys adjust to their new limbs. You should see him, Judge. It's like he's seeing veterans for the first time as actual people, not subordinates or statistics." "How's he doing?" "Quiet, humble. Seems genuinely affected by what these guys have been through. Yesterday I saw him helping a young Marine who lost both legs. The kid was frustrated, angry, throwing things, and Brennan, he just sat with him, didn't pull rank, didn't lecture, just listened. Maybe there's hope for him yet." 6 weeks later, the court-martial concluded. Captain Brennan was dishonorably discharged from the Army. 20 years of service ended in disgrace. But I also learned something else. He'd asked permission to continue his community service at the VA hospital even after his court-ordered hours were complete. He'd started attending AA meetings. He'd written personal apologies to Sergeant Thompson, to Private Rivera, to Colonel Mitchell, and to me. 6 months after that day in my courtroom, I received a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "Dear Judge Caprio, I'm writing to you from the darkest period of my life, and somehow also from a place of clarity I've never known before. I lost everything: my rank, my career, my medals, my reputation. Everything I thought defined me is gone, and you know what? I deserve to lose it all. For 20 years, I wore those medals like armor. I used my service as an excuse to avoid accountability. I looked down on people who I thought hadn't sacrificed as much as me. I was a bully with a uniform. The worst part? I genuinely believed I was untouchable, that I'd earned the right to special treatment through my service. You were right about everything you said that day. Real honor doesn't demand recognition. Real service doesn't come with a free pass to break the law. And medals are just metal unless the person wearing them actually lives up to what they represent. I'm working at the VA hospital now as a full-time volunteer. I'm 4 months sober. I'm learning what it means to actually serve others instead of just talking about my service, and I'm trying to become the kind of man who might someday deserve to wear a uniform again, not because of rank or medals, but because of character. Thank you for not letting me get away with my behavior. Thank you for showing me that nobody is above the law, and thank you for giving me the chance to find real honor through real humility. Marcus Brennan. You know, I think about that case a lot, about how Captain Brennan walked into my courtroom so sure of himself, so convinced that his service gave him special privileges, about how he had to lose everything before he could understand what service actually means. My father used to say, "Frank, there's a big difference between serving your country and using your service to serve yourself." Captain Brennan learned that difference the hard way. But here's the thing, he learned it. That's more than a lot of people do. He hit rock bottom, lost everything he thought defined him, and instead of staying bitter, he chose to rebuild himself into something better. That takes a different kind of courage than the battlefield kind. It takes the courage to admit you were wrong, to accept consequences, and to change. I still see Private Rivera around town sometimes. He finished community college, got a job with the city's Veterans Services Department, helping other vets navigate their benefits and health care. He walks a little easier now with his prosthetic, and every time I see him, I think about how he showed more honor in one court appearance than Captain Brennan showed in 20 years of service. That's the lesson, isn't it? Service isn't about medals or rank or special treatment. Service is about putting others first. It's about accepting responsibility. It's about understanding that the uniform you wear should make you more humble, not more arrogant. Captain Brennan thought he was untouchable because of his medals. He learned that in America, in a democracy, nobody is above the law, not police chiefs, not judges, and certainly not military officers who forget what their service is supposed to represent. I'm Frank Caprio, and if you found this story meaningful, if you believe in equal justice under the law, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about real justice in action. Remember, The best judgment isn't always in the law books. Sometimes it's in your heart. But also remember this: medals don't make you untouchable. Character does. And character is proven not by what you've done in the past, but by how you act in the present. Nobody is above the law, not war heroes, not judges, not anyone. That's what makes democracy work. That's what makes justice real. Thanks for listening, and God bless.